Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you, friends. Along with Johnny B, Ken Weaver, Dan Mandis here. I want to welcome on into the program Jonathan Fahey, former director of ICE, federal prosecutor as well for many years. And we're going to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's hush money trial. I want to play you some audio, Jonathan, from Anderson Cooper. Big conversation going on right now as to whether or not Donald Trump will ultimately end up in jail because of his constant violation of the gag order. This is Anderson Cooper talking about what the judge had to say in a statement.
Mr. Trump, it's important to understand that the last thing I want to do is put you in jail. You're the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. There are many reasons why incarceration is truly a last resort for me. To take that step would be disruptive to these proceedings, which I imagine you want to end as quickly as possible.
So do you think, Jonathan, that Marshawn would put Donald Trump in jail for this constant violation of the gag order?
You know, that's an interesting question, and it's kind of funny when you hear, the judges saying basically, conceding what may be going on, that Donald Trump may actually be the president, and even the left has seen that. But I think it's just so logistically complicated to actually do so, and to think of the context of doing so would be for violating the gag order, which is, I don't want to say unheard of, but I can't think of a situation where a defendant is gagged in a criminal trial for a case that everyone knows is politically motivated and should have never been brought. And part of this seems like, the overall Democratic strategy, which we see played out even the last election, of censoring opponents and things like that. And they really want to silence Donald Trump. And because they know, again, like we talked about yesterday, if you look at Joe Biden and he's your decision point, he's going to lose. So they have to do something else. But I think this judge really actually doesn't want to. And I don't think he ultimately will. And I don't think any violations that I'm aware of seem to be that bad. He's just speaking out about the trial and the prosecution, which he has every right to do. Everyone knows this is politically motivated. And again, no one thinks this case is remotely serious other than, he may get convicted, but everyone knows this case would have never been brought for anybody else.
Well, let me ask you, because I was going around in my head with this earlier today. Do you think Judge Marshawn, because I don't believe that he wants to put Trump in jail either. There's Secret Service, logistics, the whole thing. But do you think that Marshawn doesn't want to put Trump in jail because he believes that it may help the president, the former president? Or do you think that he doesn't want to put him in jail just because he literally does not want to put him in jail because there's a sense of humanity somewhere hidden deep inside the soul of Judge Marshawn?
Yeah, it could be a little bit of both because, it would just seem so incredibly heavy-handed, because this is a case that even if Donald Trump were convicted or somebody else were convicted, this doesn't seem like the type of supposed crime that anyone would ultimately even get sentenced to prison for. So that seems just very heavy-handed. But you're right. I think if he puts him in jail, I think a lot of people who already see this as a bridge too far, this particular case, will be like, well, we don't do this in this country. We don't put political opponents in jail during an election season for political benefits. And I think a lot of people will be really outraged about this because, ultimately, the Democrats always talk about the threat to the democracy, but it seems like they say that on one hand, and then the other hand, they do everything they possibly can to prevent the voters from actually having a say and weighing in on who the next president should be. And I think people in the middle would not, would find this as a major turnoff and a really scary development in the history of our country.
This is the audio as far as the justification for the judge to, what is this now, the 10th time saying that Trump violated the gag order. This is the audio.
He's rushing the trial like crazy. Nobody's ever seen a thing go like this. That jury was picked so fast, 95% Democrats. The area is mostly all Democrat. You think of it as just a purely Democrat area. It's a very unfair situation, that I can tell you.
Judge Marshawn said that violated the gag order because Trump was talking about the jury. And the judge says that the jury is worried about the safety or their safety and the safety of their family members. It seems to me like Donald Trump is talking about truth. And he didn't mention any actual names, but what the president is saying is literally true.
Yeah, that comment really seemed to be fairly innocuous. He's not singling, like you said, not singling anyone out by name. He's just basically saying this is unfair, this is political, and, and everyone knows it. Everyone knows why these cases are being brought where they're being brought. New York, whatever the numbers were for Biden, I think it was high 80s or something like that, voted for Biden. So everyone knows that these are politically motivated cases. And this idea that he can't say it, they basically want to have a one-way narrative. And you were referencing, Anderson Cooper earlier. And what I do, particularly when we're talking about this, I pull up, the CNN website, and believe it or not, they still have one, but just to get a sense of how they think things are going. And a couple things stood out. One is, I think it was like the fifth story on their website. So clearly they don't think things are going, and they're not going particularly well, nor do they think this is something they had a very good day for the government yesterday. But, so I do think when you look at all of these, the political motivations and the fact that they want to basically silence Trump for as long as they can, it just highlights that. And if he's picking on a court personnel, like, hey, this person that's a clerk name, hypothetical name, and saying some bad things about him, that might be a line. But this is a very generic comment. And if that's something you would put somebody in jail for in the United States of America, it's pretty scary.
So, Jonathan, part of what I think is going on with these gag orders, I'll make it quick, is that Trump, I believe, is speaking the truth. And so the thinking, perhaps, is that if they can somehow discourage Trump from talking the truth and speaking the truth, then they can sort of try to suppress the truth. Kind of like they did with the laptop from hell. I don't know. Is there anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting and a fantastic point. And, the laptop's a great point. But, today in America, you get in more trouble when you say something that's true than when you say something that's false. And you saw it with the laptop. You see it with, saw it with COVID.
Yep.
You see it with, Joe Biden had to walk back his statement calling Laken Riley's murderer an illegal immigrant because he told the truth. And it is funny that there's so much suppression of truth. And, Donald Trump should be able to say this is politically motivated because it is. If he got up there and said, hey, this is a very fair process and I'm being treated just like every New Yorker, that would be allowed, even though that's patently false. So it really is a very good point you make.
Well, here's another truth that hurts. Boys can't be girls. There's probably an entire list of things that we could go down, truths that hurt, but nonetheless, they're true. I want to play you a piece of audio from Donald Trump. This was yesterday talking about Joe Biden and the DOJ.
This is all Biden. You know that. This is all Biden. This is not like a local deal. This is all coming out of Washington. They're in coordination with Washington. They have people in the DA's office from Washington, from the DOJ, and they're working in the DA's office to make sure Bragg.
Yeah, to make sure that Bragg doesn't screw this up, basically. He's talking about Matthew Colangelo. Now, this guy left a lofty position at the DOJ, steps down to take over this case against Donald Trump. And so you heard Trump sort of say right there that Colangelo is there to make sure that Bragg's office doesn't screw this up. Now, yesterday the news came out that the DNC once paid this guy as a political consultant some $12,000. So you've got Judge Merchan, whose daughter, of course, as you and I spoke about before, and the audience has heard me talk about, a bazillion times. But his daughter works for the Democrats, and she once worked with Kamala Harris. There's a lot of clear evidence that this is a conflicted judge. And now we find out this guy was paid $12,000 by the DNC. Now, you tell me, though, is that a big deal or not in your world of law and politics?
Well, I think it is a really big deal. And it's the interesting thing about it, I think this was as recent as like 2017, 2018 that he was paid by the DNC. So it's not like he had a job for the DNC out of college and now, was a lawyer for years and years. I think this was, very recently, certainly within the time frame of this crime.
It was 2018.
Yeah, pretty remarkable if you think about it. So this happened after the crime. This was right before the election, the 2020 election, or within a couple of years. So it is pretty amazing, and it's almost like they've abandoned any pretense of fairness or impartiality. And the other thing is, which you were talking about, is like he went from, I believe, it's the number 3 position at DOJ, which is a high very high-level position. You obviously can't get much higher, but it's also a high-level political position within DOJ. And then to leave that to go to the Manhattan DA's office, it's certainly an unusual move at the very least. But then he happens to get thrown on the case of the political opponent of the DOJ that he was working for. It's amazing. And this case, as you know, was basically rejected by this office multiple times, rejected by the federal government. It wasn't until somebody left the DA's office, wrote a book, and then Alvin Bragg, decided to charge it. And I think Colangelo entered the office, I think, within several weeks of the case being indicted. So he was brought in specifically to do this case. As far as I can tell, it doesn't seem like he does other cases. So it really, I don't know how they could even possibly defend this. And if you're a prosecutor, and I was one for both the state and federal prosecutor, a total of 19 years, you would want to avoid anything that would even give an indication of partiality. So if you had someone that had been politically motivated that came to your office or politically in a political position, the one thing you think you would definitely do is say, I'm going to wall this person off from this case because we don't want anyone thinking this is a politically motivated prosecution. But instead, they bring him in just to do this case. So I don't see how anyone could reach a different conclusion that this was politically motivated prosecution, and he was brought over to make sure, probably as Trump said, that Bragg didn't mess it up because, there's a lot of competency issues in that office as well.
Yeah, there is. All right, so yesterday, just very quickly, we've got a minute left. Very quickly, yesterday, by all accounts, it was a very boring day, going over documents and this kind of a thing. You had a couple of people that work in the documents office for, for the former president. Talk a little bit about what we saw yesterday and what we're going to see in the rest of the week.
Yeah, yesterday they had his former controller testify, and also someone that I think is currently still there, in the accounting department. But they talked about the payments that were made to Cohen, and I think how that they were labeled as legal payments. But I think with the controller, he didn't have any, he had no testimony that Trump had any direct involvement. He talked about how he rarely spoke with Trump, and I think he said he never had spoken with Cohen. I don't know if it was literally a never, but so that was it. Basically, these payments were labeled as legal expenses, and they went to Cohen. And then the person from the accounting department, she testified that Trump signed some checks that went to Cohen. Again, nothing there is a crime.
Right.
He's allowed to pay Cohen, and they're actually allowed to pay this as a business expense. The only issue they're saying is he shouldn't have called them a legal expense, but they didn't present evidence that Trump decided to call them a legal expense. So I think that's still a problem for the prosecution. But again, it goes back to who really cares? It's his own company. No one lost money. The taxpayers didn't lose money. Who cares? And that's what this case really is.
All right. Jonathan Fahey, great analysis. Appreciate you joining us here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. We'll talk soon.